I'm going to marry her out of pity, and besides, I'm going to inherit a good amount of money. I overheard my son-in-law saying that about my daughter the week of the wedding. All his friends laughed. It was the final straw. I tapped him on the shoulder and revealed the hidden truth about that scoundrel. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment what city you're watching from. That way I can see how far my story has gone. 62 years of life had taught me to recognize the voices of the people I loved, even from a distance. So when I heard Lorenzo's laughter drifting from my backyard that Wednesday afternoon, my heart filled with a familiar warmth. My future son-in-law was here with his friends, probably finalizing some last-minute details for the wedding that would take place in just 5 days. Ivana had gone out to do some last-minute shopping for the ceremony, so I decided to make some fresh lemonade for Lorenzo and his guests. The October heat in Phoenix was relentless, and I thought it would be a nice gesture. As I sliced lemons in the kitchen, I could hear snippets of the men's conversation mingling with the sound of the pool water. 5 more days, bro, I heard one of Lorenzo's friends say, followed by laughter. 5 more days and you'll be tied down for life, another joked. I smiled to myself. Men always joke about marriage as if it's a trap. But I knew Lorenzo loved my Ivana deeply. I'd seen it in his eyes for the past 2 years. The way he looked at her when she wasn't looking, how his face lit up when she walked into a room. I finished making the lemonade and placed some glasses on a tray. As I headed toward the sliding door that led to the patio, Lorenzo's voice became clearer. He was right on the other side of the door, probably reclining in one of the chairs by the pool. I feel kind of bad for her, actually, I heard Lorenzo say, and I stopped. His tone had changed. It was no longer the playful voice I'd heard moments before. There was something more serious, more intimate in his tone. Sorry about what? One of his friends asked. About Ivana, Lorenzo replied, and my stomach clenched slightly. I mean, the poor thing really thinks this is a fairy tale. She's so excited about this whole marriage thing. I froze behind the door. The tray trembled slightly in my hands. But you're excited too, aren't you? Another friend asked. I mean, you're actually going to marry her? Lorenzo laughed, but it wasn't the warm laugh I knew. It was different, colder. Of course I'm going to marry her, he said, but not for the reasons she thinks. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Explain yourself, someone said. Lorenzo sighed, as if he were about to reveal something he'd been keeping to himself for a long time. Look, Ivana is a good girl, sweet, innocent, all that. But she's not exactly what you'd call a stunning beauty, is she? And she has these self-esteem issues that make her so needy. Constantly seeking validation. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My Ivana, my beautiful, gentle Ivana, being described that way by the man who supposedly loved her. So why are you marrying her? One of the friends asked with genuine curiosity. Because it's practical, Lorenzo replied without hesitation. The family has money. Good money. And Estella, the mother, adores me. She thinks I'm God's gift to her daughter. Poor Ivana is so desperate to be loved that she'll never question anything. She'll be an easy wife to manage. The laughter that followed pierced me like knives. These men were laughing at my daughter, at her insecurities, at her pure, trusting heart. You're a genius, brother, one of them said. Marriage of convenience, with all the benefits and none of the problems. Exactly, Lorenzo agreed. And when Estella's gone, well, Ivana will inherit everything. The house is easily worth $400,000, and that's not counting the investments and the family business. My breath became shallow. They were talking about my death as if it were part of a business plan. What if she finds out? Someone asked. What's she going to find out? Lorenzo laughed. Ivana lives in her own romantic fantasy world. She's so grateful that someone loves her that she'll never suspect a thing. Besides, have you seen the way she looks at me? She's completely smitten. The tray slipped from my hands and crashed to the floor. Glasses shattered against the kitchen, tiles, and lemonade splattered everywhere. The patio fell silent immediately. What was that? I heard one of the friends whisper. Probably Estella in the kitchen, Lorenzo replied, but I could detect a note of nervousness in his voice. I stood there staring at the mess at my feet, but my mind was processing something much bigger. Devastating. The man my daughter loved with all her heart. The man I had entrusted with my only child's future was an imposter, a predator disguised as Prince Charming. For the next few minutes, I listened as the conversation drifted to more mundane topics, as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. My world had been turned upside down. I cleaned up the mess mechanically, my hands trembling as I picked up the shards of glass. Each fragment I lifted reminded me of how my heart felt in that moment, shattered into 1,000 pieces. When I finished, I sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the patio where Lorenzo was now, laughing with his friends as if nothing had happened. How had I been so blind? How had I missed the signs? The more I thought about it, the more I realized the signs had been there all along. The way Lorenzo always asked about our family finances, his excessive interest in the will when my husband passed away last year, the way he always flattered me by telling me exactly what I wanted to hear about how special Ivana was. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Ivana. Mom, are you okay? You sound strange. I cleared my throat, trying to sound normal. I'm fine, honey, just a little tired. Lorenzo's there, right? I saw his car when I drove by. Yes, he's in the yard with some friends. Perfect, I'll take him the final invitations I picked up. Can you believe that in 5 days I'm going to be Mrs. Lorenzo Mendoza? The happiness in her voice broke my heart. No, honey, I said softly, I can't believe it. When I hung up, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let my daughter marry that man, but I also knew that simply telling her what I'd heard wouldn't be enough. Ivana was so in love that she probably wouldn't believe me. I needed proof. I needed a plan. But first, I needed to confront Lorenzo. I waited until Lorenzo's friends had left. From my bedroom window, I watched them go one by one, joking and laughing as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just taken part in the cruelest humiliation I had witnessed in my 62 years of life. Lorenzo floated in the pool, completely relaxed, checking his phone. The image made my stomach churn. There he was, enjoying the hospitality of my home, plotting to destroy my daughter's life and acting like the most innocent man in the world. I took a deep breath and went downstairs. My plan was simple: confront him directly, let him know I had heard everything, and demand that he stay away from Ivana. I was naive, I know that now, but at the time, maternal outrage clouded my judgment. I went out to the patio and closed the sliding door behind me harder than necessary. Lorenzo looked up from his phone and smiled at me with that charming smile that had won over my daughter. Estella, where's that lemonade you promised me? He joked, getting out of the pool and drying himself with a towel. We need to talk, Lorenzo Something in my tone must have warned him this wasn't a casual conversation, because his smile faltered slightly. Of course. What do you want to talk about? I overheard your conversation with your friends. The change in his expression was instantaneous. The friendly mask vanished, replaced by something far more calculating. He sat motionless for a moment, processing my words. What exactly do you think you heard? He asked, his voice now cold and measured. Everything, I said. I heard you laughing at my daughter. I heard you describing her marriage as a business deal. I heard you talking about my death as if it were part of your retirement plan. Lorenzo sat down in one of the patio chairs, leaned forward, and studied me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. I see, he said finally. That's problematic. Problematic? The word shot out of my mouth like a scream. That's all your remorse? What's problematic, Lorenzo? Estella, sit down, he said calmly. We need to have an adult conversation. I'm not sitting down. You're leaving my house right now. You're calling Ivana and calling off this wedding. You're going to tell her you had a change of heart, that you're not ready, anything. But you are not going to marry my daughter. Lorenzo laughed. But it wasn't the nervous laugh of someone who'd been caught. It was the confident laugh of someone with an ace up his sleeve. No, Estella, he said. I'm not going to do that. Sorry, but I'm not calling off the wedding. In fact, you're not going to say a word to Ivana about what you overheard. My blood ran cold. How dare you tell me what I can and can't say to my own daughter? Lorenzo stood up slowly and walked toward me, not in a threatening way, but with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Because, Estella, he said softly, I know things about you that Ivana doesn't know. Things your late husband never knew. Things that would destroy not only your relationship with your daughter, but her memory of you. Forever. The world stopped. My breath became shallow, and I felt as if someone had tightened a fist around my throat. I don't know what you're talking about, I whispered, but my voice betrayed me. Of course you do. His eyes glittered. August 1998. The Riverside Hotel in Tucson. Room 234. My legs gave way, and I had to grab the back of a chair to keep from falling. Those words, that date, that place, were like daggers aimed straight at my soul. How? How do you know? I asked. Lorenzo smiled, but it was a cruel smile. Let's just say I've done my homework on the family I'm going to marry into, and during my research, I stumbled across some very interesting information. August 1998, the year that changed everything, the year that almost destroyed your marriage and that you've kept secret for 25 years. Roberto never knew, did he? Lorenzo continued, the poor man lived and died believing you were the perfect wife. Can you imagine if he'd known that while he was working 60 hours a week to build the family business, you were having an affair with his business partner? I closed my eyes, and the memories I had buried so deeply began to resurface. Roberto, working constantly. Me feeling alone and abandoned. And David, Roberto's partner, offering me the attention and understanding I so desperately craved. It was only 3 months, I whispered. More to myself than to Lorenzo. 3 months that ended in tragedy, didn't they? He said. Because David wasn't just Roberto's business partner. He was also married. And when his wife found out. Stop, I begged. Please stop. She committed suicide, didn't she? Lorenzo went on mercilessly. Poor Maria Elena couldn't bear the betrayal. She took all those pills and never woke up. She left behind 2 young children. Tears streamed down my cheeks. That was the part of the story that had tormented me for 25 years. Not only had I betrayed my husband, but my affair had resulted in the death of an innocent woman and left 2 children without a mother. Roberto never knew why his partner suddenly wanted to dissolve the business and move to another state, Lorenzo continued, clearly enjoying my pain. He never knew why you were so depressed for months afterward. He never knew his perfect wife was responsible for a woman's death. I wasn't responsible, I tried to protest weakly. I didn't make her, you didn't hold the pills, Lorenzo cut in, but you knew David was married. You knew he had children. And you continued the affair anyway. And when it all fell apart, when Maria Elena couldn't live with the pain, you simply went back to your life as if nothing had happened. I slumped into the chair, completely defeated. For 25 years, I had lived with that guilt. I had tried to be the perfect wife to Roberto afterward. I had tried to make up for my mistake by being the best mother I could be to Ivana, but the guilt had never gone away. How did you find out? I asked, my voice breaking. The advantages of living in the digital age, Lorenzo replied casually. Hotel records. Phone logs. Police reports on Maria Elena's suicide. It's all there if you know where to look. And I'm very good at uncovering family secrets before I get married. The reality of my situation began to sink in. Lorenzo wasn't just opportunistic. He was a calculating predator who had meticulously investigated my family before approaching Ivana. What do you want? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I want this conversation to have never happened, he said smoothly. I want you to continue being the loving and supportive mother-in-law you've been so far. I want this wedding to happen, as planned. And I want you to never, ever say a word to Ivana about what you overheard today. I can't allow you to marry her now, knowing what I know, I whispered. Of course you can, he replied calmly, because the alternative is that Ivana finds out what her beloved mother really did. She finds out that her perfect mother was partly responsible for the death of an innocent woman. She finds out that her entire life has been built on a lie. Silence fell between us. I could hear the sound of the pool water. The distant traffic, my own heart beating irregularly. Ivana would never forgive you, Lorenzo continued gently. You know your daughter. You know her rigid moral compass. Do you really think she could look at her mother the same way, knowing you're responsible for leaving 2 children motherless? He was right, and we both knew it. Ivana idolized my memory of Roberto. She believed we'd had the perfect marriage. Discovering that not only had I been unfaithful, but that my infidelity had led to tragedy, would destroy her. So, here are your options, Lorenzo said, his voice now completely professional. Option 1, you keep your mouth shut, support this wedding, and continue being the mother Ivana thinks you are. Option 2, you ruin the wedding, and I make sure Ivana knows exactly what kind of woman her mother really is. I sat there, feeling more alone and hopeless than I had ever felt in my entire life. The weight of my past mistakes had become the chains of my present. For the next 2 days, I acted like an automaton. I smiled when Ivana showed me the final flower arrangements. I nodded when Lorenzo came home acting like the perfect groom. I even managed to hold normal conversations during family dinners, though every word felt like ground glass in my throat. But at night, when the house was quiet and Ivana slept, dreaming of her perfect day, I lay awake, hatching a plan. Lorenzo had made a mistake by showing me his hand so early. He had underestimated me, thinking that a 62-year-old woman with a troubled past would simply give in to his blackmail. He didn't know Estela Morales. On Friday morning, 2 days before the wedding, I waited until Ivana left for her salon appointment and Lorenzo left for his job at the insurance company, where he pretended to be a model employee. Then I began my own investigation. First, I reviewed all the documents Lorenzo had left at my house over the past few months, copies of his ID for honeymoon hotel reservations, bank account information for wedding, payments, job references. Everything seemed legitimate on the surface. But I knew appearances could be deceiving. I called my neighbor Margaret, a 70-year-old woman who had worked as a private investigator before retiring. We'd become friends after Roberto's death, and I knew I could trust her discretion. "Margaret, I need a favor, a big favor." "Tell me, dear," she said. "What do you need?" "I need you to investigate someone." Discreetly. Margaret arrived at my house that afternoon with her laptop and a serious expression. I explained the situation, omitting the details of my own past, but being clear about my suspicions regarding Lorenzo. "Do you have his social security number?" she asked, her fingers already moving across the keyboard. I provided her with all the information I had. Margaret worked silently for an hour, occasionally murmuring things like, "interesting," or "that's strange." Finally, she looked up with a grim expression. "Estela, your maternal instinct is right," she said. "This man has more red flags than a Cinco de Mayo parade." My stomach clenched. "What did you find?" "For starters," she said, turning the laptop toward me, "Lorenzo Mendoza has lived in 4 different states in the last 10 years. Every time he moves, he leaves significant debts behind. We're talking $30,000 here, $40,000 there." A stack of legal documents filled the screen. But that's not the worst of it. In Colorado, he was sued by a woman named Patricia Williams for emotional and financial fraud. Emotional fraud? I repeated. Apparently, Lorenzo pretended to be a widower and got engaged to Patricia, a 45-year-old woman who had inherited a house and some money from her parents. For 8 months, he lived with her, spent her savings on business investments that never existed, and then disappeared a week before their planned wedding. I felt nauseous. How much money? $68,000. Patricia filed a lawsuit, but Lorenzo had already moved to Utah by then. And in Utah? I asked, dreading the answer. Margaret turned the page. A similar story. A retired teacher named Helen Torres. Lorenzo approached her in a grief support group, pretending to be a widower who had lost his wife to cancer. They got engaged after 6 months. He moved into her house and gradually began taking control of her finances. How long did that last? A full year. During that time, Lorenzo convinced Helen to refinance her house to invest in a business opportunity. He also convinced her to name him as the beneficiary of her life insurance policy. My blood ran cold. What happened? I asked. Helen got lucky, Margaret said. Her son became suspicious when Lorenzo started pressuring his mother to change her will. He hired a private investigator who uncovered Lorenzo's pattern. When Lorenzo was confronted with the evidence, he disappeared in the middle of the night, taking $25,000 in cash Helen had set aside for emergencies. Margaret kept scrolling. But here's where it gets really disturbing, she continued. In Nevada, Lorenzo got involved with a woman named Carmen Vega. Carmen owned a small restaurant and had a disabled teenage daughter. My throat tightened. What happened there? Lorenzo not only took financial advantage of Carmen, Margaret said quietly, but he also began exhibiting inappropriate behavior toward her daughter. When Carmen confronted him, Lorenzo threatened to ruin her business if she spoke out. In the end, Carmen had to sell the restaurant and move in with her sister in another state. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of what I had just learned. Lorenzo wasn't just a financial con artist, he was a predator in every sense of the word. Is there more? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Unfortunately, yes, Margaret replied. In every case, Lorenzo meticulously researched his victims before approaching them. He knew about their finances, their emotional vulnerabilities, their family histories. This man is a calculating predator who specializes in older women with assets and emotional wounds. Margaret closed her laptop and looked directly at me. Estella, whatever he's using to blackmail you, it's not worth letting this man marry your daughter. Based on this pattern, he's not just going to ruin her financially, he's going to destroy her emotionally, and possibly worse. She hesitated, then added, in Nevada, Carmen filed a restraining order because Lorenzo had started talking about how it would be easier if she had an accident after she changed her will. Nothing could ever be proven, but Carmen took the threat seriously. The room began to spin around me. Lorenzo wasn't just a con man. He was potentially dangerous. I need copies of all of this, I said, my voice trembling. They're already printed. Margaret handed me a thick folder. But Estella, you have to go to the police with this. I can't, I said. It's complicated. Margaret studied me for a long moment. What does he have on you? She asked softly. I couldn't answer. The weight of my own secret still felt heavier than everything we'd just uncovered about Lorenzo. Okay, she said finally. Don't tell me. But think about this, whatever you did in the past. Okay, it was wrong. But that past mistake is not worth your daughter's future. After Margaret left, I sat in my living room with the evidence folder spread out in front of me. Photographs of Lorenzo's previous victims. Copies of lawsuits. Police reports. Financial documents. It all painted a picture of a man who had perfected the art of destroying lives, and in less than 48 hours, he was going to marry my Ivana. That night, when Lorenzo arrived for dinner with us as if he were part of the family, I had to use all my willpower not to confront him right then and there. But I knew I needed to be smart about this. Lorenzo was dangerous, and if I cornered him without a plan, he could hurt Ivana before I could protect her. During dinner, I watched how he interacted with my daughter, the way he subtly controlled the conversation, how he redirected any topic that didn't suit him, how he constantly touched Ivana, in ways that seemed affectionate but that I now recognized as possessive. Mom, you're very quiet tonight, Ivana observed. Are you okay? I'm just a little tired, love. It's been an intense week with all the preparations, I replied. Lorenzo smiled at me from across the table. Estella has been amazing, helping with everything, he said smoothly. I don't know what we would have done without her. His words sounded affectionate, but his eyes sent a different message. Remember our agreement. After dinner, while Ivana was washing the dishes, Lorenzo came up to me in the living room. You look tense, Estella, he murmured. You're not having second thoughts about our conversation, are you? I looked him straight in the eye, remembering the photographs of Patricia, Helen, Carmen, and all the other women whose lives he had destroyed. No, Lorenzo, I said. I'm not having second thoughts. He smiled, believing he had one. He had no idea the war was just beginning. On Saturday morning, exactly 24 hours before Lorenzo would destroy my daughter's life forever, I received a call that changed everything. "Mrs. Morales, this is Patricia Williams." Margaret had given her my number. I sat on the edge of my bed, my heart pounding. Patricia Williams, the woman from Colorado, whom Lorenzo had scammed. "Margaret explained your situation to me," Patricia continued. "And I have information you need to know. Information that could save your daughter's life." "My daughter's life?" I repeated. "Mrs. Morales, Lorenzo Mendoza is more dangerous than Margaret was able to discover online. Can you meet me today? I'm willing to travel to Phoenix." 3 hours later, I sat in a cafe in downtown Phoenix with a thin woman in her 40s, with prematurely graying brown hair and eyes that had seen too much pain. "Thank you for coming," I said when she sat across from me. I couldn't stand by and do nothing, knowing another woman was going to go through what I went through, and possibly worse, Patricia said. She opened a folder she had brought with her. "This is what Margaret couldn't find in the public records," she explained. "After Lorenzo stole from me and disappeared, I hired a private investigator, not only to try to get my money back, but to make sure he didn't hurt anyone else." She showed me a series of photographs. "These are all the women Lorenzo has been involved with in the last 15 years, as far as we know." I counted quickly. There were 12 women, all between 40 and 60 years old, all with expressions of trust that gradually turned to fear in the later photographs. "But there's more," Patricia said, lowering her voice. "3 of these women are dead." I felt like I'd been doused with ice water. "Dead?" I whispered. Dorothy Chen in Oregon died in a car accident 6 months after Lorenzo disappeared with her savings. Susan Richards in Washington committed suicide after discovering Lorenzo had emptied her retirement accounts. And Rachel Montenegro in California died of an accidental drug overdose 2 weeks after confronting Lorenzo about his lies. My hand trembled as I held my coffee mug. "You're saying—" "I'm saying I can't prove it," Patricia said. "No one can. Lorenzo is too smart for that. But the circumstances are too convenient." In each case, these women had discovered his true nature, and were about to take legal action against him. She leaned forward. "Mrs. Morales, I was lucky. When I found out what Lorenzo really was, my brother, who's a police officer, helped me handle the situation discreetly. But these other women, they didn't have that protection." "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "I'm suggesting that if your daughter marries Lorenzo tomorrow, her life is in real danger, not just financially, but physically." I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of the situation. I wasn't just trying to protect Ivana from a marriage based on lies. I was trying to protect her from a potential killer. "Is there anything else?" I asked quietly. "Yes," Patricia said. "We survivors have been in contact. We've become a sort of support network, and we've noticed a pattern in how Lorenzo chooses his victims." "What kind of pattern?" "Vulnerable women with assets, but also with secrets," Patricia said. "Lorenzo meticulously investigates his targets before approaching them. He looks for information he can use for blackmail if things get complicated. Past affairs, financial problems, hidden scandals, anything the victim wouldn't want made public. Lorenzo is a master at finding and exploiting these secrets." My stomach sank. Lorenzo hadn't discovered my affair by chance. He had deliberately investigated me, looking for exactly that kind of leverage. "Mrs. Morales," Patricia said, looking me straight in the eye, "does Lorenzo have something on you? Something he's using to keep you quiet?" I couldn't answer. The cafe felt too hot, too crowded, too small. Okay, she said gently. Don't tell me. But whatever he has on you, it's not worth your daughter's life. Believe me, I've learned from experience that secrets from the past are never worth more than someone's future. Patricia closed the folder. I brought something that might help you, she said, pulling out a small device that looked like a USB drive. It's a very small, very sensitive microphone. If you can get Lorenzo to confess anything about his real plans or about the other women, we'd have real evidence. I don't know if I can, I said. Tomorrow is the wedding. Exactly, Patricia said. After that, Lorenzo will have legal access to your daughter's assets. He'll be in a position of power over her, and, based on the pattern we've identified, once he has what he wants, your daughter will become a problem he needs to solve. The device felt heavy in my hand, though it probably didn't weigh more than a few ounces. How does it work? I asked. It's voice-activated and records automatically, Patricia explained. It has a 12-hour battery. You just need to get Lorenzo to talk about his true intentions, about the other women, anything that can be used as evidence. That afternoon, I returned home with the device hidden in my purse and a plan beginning to form in my mind. But first, I needed to do something I'd been putting off. When Ivana left for her bachelorette party with her friends, I called Lorenzo. Lorenzo, can you come tonight? I need to talk to you about something important. About what? He asked. About money, I said. About how we're going to handle the finances after you marry Ivana. I could hear the interest in his voice immediately. Of course, he said. I'll be there in an hour. I spent that hour preparing myself mentally for the performance of my life. I hid the recording device inside the lamp in the living room, right where Lorenzo would sit. I laid out some real, financial documents to make the conversation look legitimate. And, most importantly, I practiced acting like the cooperative mother-in-law he expected me to be. When Lorenzo arrived, he was dressed casually, but he looked confident, like a man who believed he had already won. Estella, I'm glad you want to talk about this, he said as he came in. It shows you really care about Ivana's future. Of course I care, I replied. She's my only daughter. We sat in the living room with Lorenzo exactly where I had planned, directly in front of the hidden microphone. Then I began. I've been thinking about what you said, I told him, about being practical regarding marriage. Lorenzo leaned forward, interested. I'm glad to hear that, he said. I want to make sure Ivana is protected financially, that her future is secure. Exactly, I said. That's been my concern from the beginning. So help me understand what your exact plans are, for the marriage, for the finances. For everything. Lorenzo smiled, and for a moment I saw exactly what the other women must have seen before. He destroyed them, charm, confidence, and beneath it all, something cold and calculating. Well, Estella, he said, since we're being honest with each other. And he began to talk. For the next hour, Lorenzo explained meticulously how he planned to manipulate Ivana's finances, how he would gradually isolate her from any support system, and how he would eventually gain complete control over her life. But what truly froze my blood was when he casually mentioned the permanent solutions he had had to implement in the past when things got complicated with previous women. Of course, he said with an easy laugh, sometimes women get too problematic. They start asking questions. They want to involve lawyers. They threaten to go to the police. In those cases, well, you have to be creative about how you solve the problem. Creative? I repeated, forcing my voice to stay neutral. Accidents happen, Estella, he said. Especially when women are under a lot of emotional stress, depression, medication, bad decisions. It's surprising how easy it is to make something look natural. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it, but I maintained a neutral expression. But of course, Lorenzo continued, that's never going to be necessary with Ivana. She's so manageable, so trusting. She's not going to cause me problems like the others. The device was recording every word. On Sunday morning, the day of the wedding, I woke up at 5 a.m. with the weight of a decision that would change everything. The recording of my conversation with Lorenzo was saved on my phone. Every incriminating word preserved digitally. I had evidence of his threats, his confessions about previous women, and, most importantly, his specific plan to manipulate and eventually harm Ivana. But I also knew that using that evidence would mean exposing myself. Lorenzo would make good on his threat to reveal my affair and the circumstances surrounding Maria Elena's death. Ivana would learn the truth about who her mother really was. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking toward the window where the sun was beginning to peek over the Phoenix Mountains. In a few hours, the guests would start to arrive. The photographer would be here at 10. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. At 6, my phone rang. It was Patricia. Mrs. Morales, I'm sorry to call so early, she said, but I couldn't sleep. Were you able to get anything on the recording? Yes, I whispered, not wanting to wake Ivana. I got everything. He confessed to manipulating Ivana, to controlling her finances, and he even admitted to getting rid of problematic women in the past. Oh my God, Patricia breathed. That's more than we expected. Are you going to take it to the police? I closed my eyes. It's complicated, I said. Mrs. Morales, Patricia replied gently, with all due respect, there's nothing complicated about saving your daughter's life. He has information on me, I said. Information that would destroy my relationship with Ivana forever. There was a long pause on the line. What could be worse, Patricia asked quietly, than allowing your daughter to marry a potential killer? I couldn't respond, because I didn't have an answer that made sense. Mrs. Morales, let me ask you something, Patricia continued. If your daughter discovered the truth about you, but was still alive to someday forgive you, wouldn't that be better than her being dead and never having that chance? Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Think about it, she said. And if you need support today, all of us are here. Helen flew in from Utah last night. Carmen is on her way from Nevada. You're not alone in this. After I hung up, I sat in silence for another hour. Then I heard movement in Ivana's room. My daughter was waking up on what she believed would be the happiest day of her life. At 7:30, Ivana came into the kitchen, radiant. With a smile I hadn't seen in months. Good morning, Mom, she said. Can you believe today is finally the day? I looked at her, my beautiful 32-year-old daughter, who had struggled with self-esteem issues all her life, who believed she'd found her first real chance at love with Lorenzo. My heart broke. Sweetheart, can we talk? I asked. Of course, she said, but make it quick. The girls are coming in an hour to start hair and makeup. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Ivana, I began, are you absolutely sure Lorenzo is the right man for you? Her smile faltered slightly. Mom, why are you asking me that today? I just want to make sure you're completely happy. Of course I'm happy, she said. Lorenzo loves me, Mom. After years of thinking no one would really see me, he sees me. He values me. Lorenzo's words echoed in my mind. The poor thing really thinks this is a fairy tale. And do you love him? I asked quietly. Mom, what kind of question is that? Of course I love him. I'm marrying him in 6 hours. But do you really know him? I asked. Do you know his past? His history? Ivana frowned. What do you mean? This was the moment. I could tell her everything right now. Show her the evidence. Play the recording. Save her from the destruction waiting for her. But that would also mean that within hours, she would know my darkest secret. Just make sure you really know him, I said weakly. Ivana stood up, clearly frustrated. Mom, I don't know what's going on with you lately, she said, but today is my wedding day. I'm not going to let last-minute doubts ruin it. She headed toward the stairs, then stopped and turned back. You know what? Lorenzo was right, she said. Right about what? I asked, my chest tightening. He said you might get a little jealous when I finally found someone. You've been used to having me all to yourself since Dad died. Her words cut me like a knife. Lorenzo had already been planting seeds of distrust between us, preparing for any opposition I might raise. Sweetheart, it's okay, Mom, I get it, she said. But today, I'm marrying the man I love, and I hope you can be happy for me. She went upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the weight of the most important decision of my life. At 9, Ivana's friends arrived, filling the house with laughter and excitement. The makeup artist and hairstylist came shortly after. The house transformed into a whirlwind of wedding day activity. I retreated to my room, saying I needed to get ready, but really, I just sat on my bed staring at my phone. The recording was there, waiting. Patricia had sent me the number of a Phoenix police detective who specialized in cases like Lorenzo's. At 11, Lorenzo arrived, supposedly to pick up some things he'd left the night before, but I knew he'd really come to make sure I hadn't changed my mind. Good morning, Estella, he said when he found me in the kitchen. Big day, huh? Yes, I replied quietly. A very big day. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I hope you've had time to reflect on our conversation last night, he said. On how important it is to keep certain things in perspective. I've been reflecting a lot, I replied. Good, he said softly. Because it would be terrible if anything interrupted Ivana's perfect day, especially something related to old family secrets that have been buried for so long. His words were a barely veiled threat. He was reminding me exactly what I stood to lose if I chose to act against him. I've also been thinking, he continued, about what we discussed last night about the future, about how to handle complicated situations. What do you mean? I asked carefully. Only that sometimes, when older people have to face traumatic revelations about their past, they can become unpredictable, he said. Emotional. They might make irrational decisions. The message was clear. He wasn't just threatening to expose my past, he was also implying that if I caused problems, my own safety might be at risk. Are you threatening me, Lorenzo? I asked. Of course not, he replied smoothly. I'm just concerned about your well-being. After all, we're going to be family. At noon, I received a message from Patricia. We're here. The others are with me. We're at the Marriott downtown, room 512. Whatever you need, whatever support, just call. I stood there, reading the message over and over. Women who didn't even know me had traveled from different states to support me in this crucial moment. They had faced their own trauma to make sure another woman didn't suffer what they had suffered. At 12:30, Ivana came down the stairs in her wedding dress. She looked absolutely radiant, more beautiful than I had ever seen her. The dress was perfect, her makeup flawless, her smile bright enough to light the whole room. "How do I look, Mom?" she asked. I walked up to her, took her hands, and looked her straight in the eyes. In that moment, I saw her future split into two possible paths. In one, she married Lorenzo and was gradually destroyed, manipulated, and possibly worse. In the other, she discovered the truth about him and about me, but had the chance to build a real life based on honesty. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I said. "Absolutely beautiful." "You're crying," she said softly. "They're tears of happiness," I lied. But they weren't tears of happiness. They were the tears of a mother who had finally made the hardest decision of her life. "Ivana," I said, "there's something I need to tell you before you go to the church." "Mom, there's no time," she protested. "The guests are already arriving." "Please," I said. "Just give me 5 minutes." Something in my tone must have told her this was serious, because she sat down on the sofa, her dress spreading around her like flower petals. "What's wrong?" she asked. I took out my phone and pressed play on the recording. Lorenzo's voice filled the living room, clear and cruel. Ivana sat frozen as she listened to the man she loved describe their marriage as a business deal, talk about her with contempt, and admit to getting rid of problematic women in the past. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Ivana had her hands pressed against her mouth, her eyes filled with tears that threatened to ruin her perfect makeup. That's really Lorenzo's voice?" she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "I recorded it last night." "When did he say those things?" she asked. "After you left for your bachelorette party," I replied. "I invited him here and made him talk." Ivana stood up suddenly and began pacing back and forth in the living room, the long train of her dress dragging behind her. "I don't understand," she said. "Why are you showing me this now? Why did you wait until today?" I took a deep breath, knowing the hardest part was just beginning. "Because Lorenzo was blackmailing me to keep me quiet," I said. "Blackmailing you? With what?" Ivana asked. "What could he possibly have on you?" "With something from my past," I said. "Something I never told you. Something your father never knew." Ivana stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "What?" she asked. 25 years ago, I began, when you were 7, your father and I went through a very difficult time. He was working constantly. I felt lonely and abandoned. For 3 months, I had an affair with David, your father's business partner." I watched the information hit her. Her face paled beneath the makeup. "Mom," she whispered. "The affair ended when David's wife found out," I continued. She couldn't handle the betrayal. She killed herself, Ivana. Maria Elena took an overdose of pills and died, leaving behind 2 small children. Ivana collapsed onto the sofa, her dress crumpling around her. "For 25 years, I've carried that guilt," I said. "Your father never knew why David suddenly wanted to dissolve the business and move away. He never knew that his wife had had an affair. He never knew that the affair resulted in the death of an innocent woman." "And Lorenzo knew this?" Ivana asked, stunned. "Yes," I said. "He investigated us. He found out before he ever approached you. And when I heard his conversation about marrying you for money and confronted him, he used my secret to keep me silent. Tears finally began to roll down Ivana's cheeks, cutting small rivers through her makeup. Then why are you telling me now? She asked. If he had that kind of power over you, why tell me today? Because yesterday I discovered Lorenzo isn't just a con artist, I said. He's a predator who has destroyed the lives of at least 12 women. 3 of them have died in suspicious circumstances after discovering his lies. I told her about Patricia, about Margaret, about all the women who had traveled to Phoenix to support us. I explained Lorenzo's pattern, his methods, his threats. Ivana, I said, my voice breaking, I thought losing you because of my secret would be the worst thing that could happen. But losing you forever, to him, would be so much worse. We sat in silence for several minutes. I could hear movement upstairs as Ivana's friends waited for her to come back for final touch-ups. All this time, Ivana said finally, her voice hollow, I've been living in a lie. No, sweetheart, I said quickly. Not all your life. The love your father and I had for you was always real. My love for you has always been real. My mistake doesn't change that. But Dad died without knowing the truth, she said. Your father died knowing he was loved and that he'd raised an incredible daughter, I replied. That was the truth that mattered to him. Ivana wiped her tears with the back of her hand. What are we going to do about Lorenzo? She asked. The guests are already at the church. That decision is yours, I said. But I want you to know you have options. Patricia and the other women are here for you. The police can act based on the recording. You don't have to face this alone. At that moment, we heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, we saw Lorenzo getting out of his BMW, dressed in his tuxedo, smiling like the perfect groom he had pretended to be for 2 years. He's here, Ivana whispered. What do you want to do? I asked. Ivana stood slowly, smoothing her dress. Something had changed in her posture, in her expression. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by determination. I want to confront him, she said. Are you sure? I asked. I've spent my whole life being a victim of my own insecurities, she replied. I'm not going to be the victim of his lies. Lorenzo came in using his key, calling out cheerfully. Hello, family, he said. I know I'm not supposed to see the bride before the ceremony. But I forgot my special bow tie. He stepped into the living room and stopped dead when he saw our faces. What's going on? He asked. Why do you look so serious? Ivana walked toward him, still beautiful in her wedding dress, but now with a power he had never seen before. Lorenzo, she said calmly, do you really love me? He laughed nervously. Of course I love you, he said. What kind of question is that on our wedding day? Then tell me the truth about Patricia Williams, Ivana said. The smile vanished from his face. His eyes darted between Ivana and me. I don't know who that is, he said. And Helen Torres, Ivana added quietly. And Carmen Vega. Lorenzo stepped back. Ivana, I don't know what your mother's been telling you, but, and Dorothy Chen, Ivana continued. Susan Richards. And Rachel Montenegro. Now his face had lost all color. He realized his game was over. What do you want? He asked flatly, dropping the pretense. We want you to leave, Ivana said calmly. We want you out of our lives, and we don't ever want to see you again. You can't get rid of me that easily, Ivana, he said. I have information on your mother that, I already know everything, Ivana cut in. Lorenzo, she told me. He turned to me, confused. You told her? He demanded. Yes, I said. She knows everything about me. And she knows everything about you, too. If you go to the police, he began. We already have, I lied. They have the recording of our conversation from last night. They know about the other women. It was a lie, but Lorenzo had no way of knowing that. He walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. You're going to regret this, Ivana, he said. No other man is ever going to want you. You'll end up alone and bitter, just like your mother. I'd rather be alone, Ivana replied, than with someone who sees me as a victim. And when people find out what your mother did, Lorenzo sneered, when the whole city knows that Estela Morales is responsible for a woman's death. Then they'll know my mother made a terrible mistake 25 years ago, Ivana interrupted, but that she had the courage to protect her daughter when it really mattered. Lorenzo looked at me with pure malice. This isn't over, he said. Yes, Lorenzo, I replied, standing up to face him. It is. And if you ever try to contact my daughter again, if you ever try to hurt another woman, I'll make sure every one of your previous victims knows exactly where to find you. He left without another word. After Lorenzo's car disappeared down the street, Ivana and I sat together on the sofa. She was still wearing her wedding dress, but she was no longer a bride. She was a woman who had chosen freedom over illusion. Do you regret it? I asked her softly. Regret what? She said. Not getting married today. Finding out the truth about you. She took my hand and squeezed it. Mom, it hurts to know what you did, she said. It's going to take time for me to process it all. But I don't regret knowing the truth. And I don't regret avoiding the biggest mistake of my life. And what are we going to do about the church full of guests? I asked. We're going to go, Ivana said. We're going to tell them there's no wedding. And if anyone asks why, we'll tell them that sometimes you discover the truth about people just in time. 3 months later, Ivana had gone back to university to finish her master's in social work. She'd found purpose in helping other women who had been victims of emotional manipulation. Patricia, Helen, Carmen, and I had become unlikely friends, united by our experience with Lorenzo, strengthened by our survival. As for Lorenzo, he had disappeared from Phoenix, but Patricia maintained a network among his previous victims. If he showed up somewhere new, we would know. One afternoon, as Ivana and I had coffee in the kitchen, she asked me, "Do you miss the life you thought we were going to have? You mean the life where I kept secrets and you married a man who wanted to destroy you?" I asked. When you put it like that, it sounds awful, she said with a small laugh. It was awful, I replied. What we have now. This is real life. Complicated. Sometimes painful. But real. Ivana smiled. You know what Patricia told me yesterday? She asked. What? I asked. That the strongest women are the ones who've survived their own mistakes, she said, and chosen to do something better with that experience. Patricia is a wise woman, I said. Yes, Ivana nodded. She's like my second mom. I leaned over and hugged my daughter, the brave woman she had become. Sometimes, the truth hurts. Sometimes it costs more than you think you can pay. But it always costs less than living a lie. And sometimes, when you finally find the courage to pay the price of the truth, You discover that the freedom you get in return is worth every tear, every hard moment, every bridge you have to burn to reach the other side. Ivana never married Lorenzo. She married the truth, and that made her the freest woman I've ever known.